There are mornings when you cannot rise from your bed, and you believe this is weakness or failure. But I have seen that such heaviness often comes when the soul has reached its limit and refuses to continue along a path that no longer nourishes it. The body obeys the soul long before the mind understands. When you lie there unable to move, you may think you are merely tired. Yet the deeper truth is that something within you is calling you back to yourself. The bed becomes a boundary between the outer world and the inner one. You feel unable to step across it because your soul is pulling you downward into its own chamber. The world demands constant movement, but the unconscious does not work through speed. It speaks through stillness, through heaviness, through the strange pull toward darkness and quiet. When you cannot get out of bed, it may mean the inner world is louder than the outer one, and you have refused to listen for too long. I learned from many patients that the Thailand soul withdraws when ignored. It takes back its energy from tasks that drain rather than nourish. The person feels this withdrawal as fatigue, as numbness, as a strange difficulty in performing the simplest actions. The soul says, "You cannot live this way anymore," and the body obeys the message. Often the heaviness arises when a person has betrayed an inner truth. It may be a longing they have silenced, a fear they have denied, or a wound they have hidden even from themselves. The body becomes heavy because the soul demands attention. It forces you to stop so that what has been buried can rise. In many dreams, people find themselves unable to move, trapped in rooms, or sinking into shadows. These dreams reflect the same condition you feel when you cannot rise. They show the ego losing its false control so that a deeper transformation can begin. The dream prepares the soul for the very moment you now face. Your bed becomes a symbolic place, half earth, half womb. To lie, there is to sink into the soil where seeds grow. Though you may feel useless, something within you is quietly forming, gathering strength for a change you do not yet understand. Transformation begins not in movement, but in surrender. Do not despise these moments. They may be painful, but they are honest. When you cannot rise, you are meeting the truth of your own exhaustion. Exhaustion of pretending, of enduring, of carrying burdens meant for another time in your life. The soul gives you no more energy for what does not belong to you. Sometimes the soul pulls you down because you have lived too long in a life built on duty rather than desire. You rise each day to meet expectations that have nothing to do with your inner nature. The body finally refuses. It says, "No more, not until you listen." And so you lie there, held by your own inner cry. Other times the soul holds you in bed because it wants to show you something, a memory you avoided, a feeling you suppressed, a truth you feared would break you. Yet the truth does not break, it frees. The heaviness keeps you still long enough for the truth to rise from the depths and touch the surface of your awareness. There are people who think they must fight this heaviness with force, with commands, with judgment. But the soul does not respond to force. It opens only when approached with humility and curiosity. Ask quietly, what have I ignored? What does my soul want? What part of me has been calling for help? These questions turn darkness into dialogue. When you listen, you may sense that your soul is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect you from continuing a life that harms you, from walking further down a road that leads nowhere, from losing yourself in duties that steal your vitality. The soul removes your strength so that you will not wander further from yourself. Slowly, as you face the truth that rises in this stillness, you will feel the first spark of life returning. It may be faint at first, like a small flame trembling in a dark room, but as you honor your inner needs, the heaviness loosens. The body grows lighter because the soul has been heard. When you finally rise from your bed, you do not rise as the same person who lay down. You rise with a clearer sense of what you need, what you can no longer endure, and what direction your life must turn. The soul gives back your strength when it knows you will use it for a life aligned with your inner truth. So when you cannot get out of bed, do not call yourself weak. Call yourself cold. Your soul is speaking in the only language it can use when all others have failed. It holds you down not to punish you, but to bring you home. There are mornings when you lie in your bed and feel as though the world is far away, as though the simple act of rising is heavier than anything you can bear. You may believe this heaviness comes from laziness or lack of will, yet I have seen that such moments often come when the soul has withdrawn its strength. The body cannot rise because the soul no longer supports the movement. A person does not collapse into stillness without reason. The soul steps back only when it has been ignored for too long. You push yourself through days that do not nourish you, through tasks that empty you, through duties that do not belong to your deepest nature. Slowly the inner flame dims. The body feels this dimming before the mind understands, and so you lie there, unable to rise. When the soul withdraws, the bed becomes a border between two worlds. One world demands motion, noise, and outward action. The other world calls you inward, downward, back into yourself. The heaviness you feel is the pull of that inner world. It is not weakness, it is direction. It is the soul asking for your attention in the only way it can. You may try to force yourself upward. You may tell yourself that you must move, must rise, must continue. But the soul does not obey commands. It answers only to truth. When truth has been denied, the soul refuses to lend its strength to the outer life. This refusal appears as fatigue, as heaviness, as a quiet collapse of the will. The world praises constant movement, but the inner world does not move with such haste. It speaks through symbols, through small tremors in feeling, through dreams that echo your hidden state. When you cannot get out of bed, it may be that the unconscious is louder than your thoughts. You have reached a point where silence demands to be heard. Often the person who collapses into bed believes they are failing. Yet I have seen that such collapse is often the beginning of healing. The soul removes energy from everything that harms you or drains you. It says, you cannot continue in this direction, and the body listens. The heaviness is a message. Stop, listen, look inward. You may feel as though the world outside is too large, too bright, too demanding. The simple act of standing feels like stepping into a storm. This feeling shows that the life you have been living is no longer aligned with your inner truth. The soul prevents you from rising because rising would mean returning to a path that damages you. You may not know what truth you have ignored. You may not know what wound has called you back. But the heaviness knows. It arises when a part of you has been silenced for too long. It arises when a longing has been buried, when a fear has been denied, when a memory has gone unspoken. The soul holds these truths deep within, waiting for the moment you are still enough to hear them. In many dreams I have studied, people lie motionless in dark rooms or find themselves sinking into earth or water. These dreams show the same condition you feel when you cannot rise. They show the ego losing its false control. They reveal that a deeper self is preparing to surface. When the dreams show paralysis, the waking life soon reflects it. The bed becomes symbolic in such moments. It is not merely a place of rest, it becomes an inner chamber, half womb, half grave, a place where the old self dissolves and the new self begins to form. Though you feel useless as you lie there, something within you is shifting. A change is preparing itself. The darkness around you becomes the soil in which the soul plants something new. Many people despise this heaviness. They judge themselves for it. They try to rise with force. But force cannot lift what truth has weighted down. The soul is not punishing you, it is protecting you. It pulls you into stillness so that you do not walk further into a life that fragments you. Sometimes this heaviness means you have lived too long in ways that betray your nature. You rise each day to satisfy expectations that crush your spirit. You carry burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. You silence your feelings so that others will not be disturbed. The soul finally withdraws. It stops supporting the false life, and so the body collapses. Other times, the heaviness means you must face something you avoided, a memory that haunts the edges of your mind, a sorrow you never allowed yourself to feel, a truth about yourself that frightened you. When you cannot rise, it may be because the soul wishes to show you what lies beneath the noise of daily life. Stillness is the language of the unconscious. Heaviness is its punctuation. Silence is its doorway. You lie there because your soul wants to speak, and the soul speaks only when the ego grows quiet, when the outer world loses its grip, when you stop pretending that everything is fine. In this quiet, the truth finds room to rise. You may feel a deep emptiness as you lie there. This emptiness is not a lack, it is a clearing. The soul is removing the things that no longer belong to you. It is clearing space for something new to grow. But before the new can rise, the old must be released. At first, the heaviness feels frightening. You fear you will never rise again. You fear you will remain trapped. But the soul does not pull you downward to destroy you. It pulls you downward so you may meet the parts of yourself you have forgotten. Only through descent can you reach the foundation of your true self. As you lie there, you may feel thoughts rising without being invited, memories you did not ask for, feelings you tried to bury, strange images drifting across your mind. These are not random, they are the messengers of the unconscious. They rise now because the outer world has been silenced long enough for them to speak. This rising may be uncomfortable. It may show you things you did not want to see. But these things have always lived within you. They shape your actions. They form your fears. They influence your choices. Only by meeting them can you become whole again. Slowly, as the soul feels heard, the heaviness begins to soften. Not immediately, not suddenly, but gently, like dawn spreading across a dark horizon. You feel the first faint warmth returning to your limbs. You feel the first small desire to move. You feel a spark inside, fragile yet alive. This spark is not the return of your old self. It is the beginning of a new self, one that rises not from duty, but from truth. When you finally sit up, even slightly, you do so with a clearer sense of what you can no longer carry. Something inside you whispers what must change, what must be released, what must not be ignored again. You rise not because the world demands it, but because the soul allows it. And when you stand, you do not stand as the same person who fell into bed. You stand changed, you stand aware, you stand closer to the truth of your own nature. For this is the mystery of heaviness. It is not a failure, it is a beginning. The soul refuses to rise until it knows you will rise into a life aligned with truth. There are burdens that a person carries long before they ever feel heavy. These burdens gather slowly, one quiet moment at a time, until the soul can no longer hold them. You may think you collapse only when the weight becomes unbearable, but the truth is, the weight has been building for years. The day you cannot rise is only the day the soul finally speaks loudly enough to be heard. Much of this hidden weight comes from living a life that does not match your inner nature. You move through days shaped by duty, not desire. You perform tasks that drain you, yet you tell yourself this is normal. You silence feelings, thinking they will disappear. But the soul remembers what the mind dismisses. The unspoken becomes heavy. The unacknowledged becomes stone. The weight beneath your life is made not from a single sorrow, but from many small ones. A quiet disappointment you pushed aside, a sadness you never let yourself feel, a longing you silenced because it was inconvenient, a fear you hid because you believed you must be strong. These silent truths collect like dust in an unused room until the room becomes too full to enter. As you lie in bed, unable to rise, you may not understand why such heaviness has come, but your soul understands. The soul knows every moment you forced yourself to endure what wounded you. It knows the hours you spent pretending to be fine. It knows the nights you swallowed tears rather than face the truth. When the soul can no longer carry these things, it lowers you gently into stillness. There is a weight that comes from living outwardly while dying inwardly. The outer world sees your smile, your tasks, your speech, but the inner world feels the slow collapse of meaning. You rise each day with less of yourself. You give away too much. You receive too little. You ignore the part of you that grows smaller. And when this inner self becomes too faint, the body can no longer rise. The hidden weight also grows when you silence your deeper needs. You may desire rest, but you push yourself. You may desire change, but you cling to what is familiar. You may desire truth, but you fear its consequences. You tell yourself that you must keep moving, even when your soul whispers that you are moving in the wrong direction. Each time you deny this whisper, the weight grows. There are wounds that the mind forgets, but the body remembers. A harsh word spoken long ago, a loss you never grieved, a moment of fear you survived by becoming numb. These wounds do not disappear. They sink into the depths and live in the body. When you cannot get out of bed, the body is showing you a truth your mind has refused to see. It is holding the shadow you could not face. Dreams often reveal the weight long before you feel it. I have seen countless dreams where a person tries to run but their legs feel heavy, or where they try to climb but the stairs crumble beneath them. These dreams show the soul struggling beneath burdens the waking self has ignored. When the dream body cannot move, the waking body soon reflects the same truth. The heaviness you feel is not an enemy. It is a message. It says, you have carried too much. You may think you are strong because you endure, but endurance without honesty becomes suffering withheld from light. The soul does not wish you to suffer silently. It wishes you to see what you have lived with. It wishes you to understand the hidden weight before it destroys your spirit. There are many forms of hidden weight. Some come from relationships that no longer feed your inner life. Some come from tasks that consume you without meaning. Some come from the guilt of living in ways that betray your deeper nature. Some come from the quiet belief that you must be someone other than who you are. Each form adds its own heaviness to the soul. You may not notice this weight day by day. You may move through your life with small discomforts, telling yourself that nothing is wrong. But the soul notices everything. It sees the tension in your chest when you pretend to be fine. It feels the sinking in your stomach when you remain in places that drain your life. It senses the exhaustion behind your smile, and it waits, patient yet firm, for the moment you are ready to listen. When the soul decides you can no longer ignore these truths, it removes its support from the life that breaks you. This removal feels like fatigue. It feels like heaviness. It feels like paralysis. But it is the soul saying, you must stop, you must look, and the body follows. The body bows to the weight because the weight belongs to truth. You may think this weight will crush you. Yet I have seen that people are weakened more by the burdens they ignore than by the ones they face. When heaviness forces you to lie still, you are finally able to see everything you have carried. This seeing is painful, but it is also freeing, for what is seen can be healed, what is hidden cannot be touched. As you lie in bed, the hidden weight begins to rise into awareness, not all at once, not with violence, but slowly, like mist lifting from a dark field. A memory surfaces, a feeling returns, a truth whispers. You begin to understand that you have lived beyond your inner limits. The weight becomes visible. And once visible, it begins to change. The soul does not bring weight without purpose. It brings weight when something inside you needs to break open. It brings weight when you cannot continue as you have. It brings weight because something new wants to be born. You may resist this moment. You may plead with yourself to rise, to continue, to ignore the heaviness. But resistance only deepens the weight. The soul will not release what you refuse to acknowledge. When you try to stand while the soul holds you down, you tear yourself further from truth. And so the body holds you still. It does not let you escape. It keeps you in the one place where you must remain inside yourself. As the hidden weight surfaces, you begin to see the places where you have lived falsely. You see the words you spoke that did not match your heart. You see the roles you played that did not match your spirit. You see the expectations you carried that were never yours. You see the life you lived as though it belonged to someone else. This seeing can feel overwhelming. Yet this is the beginning of freedom. The hidden weight loses its power when it is brought into the light of consciousness. What once crushed you begins to soften. What once held you down begins to loosen. The bed that felt like a prison becomes a sanctuary where truth gathers strength. Slowly, you begin to feel the soul shifting inside you. It gathers the scattered pieces of your being. It prepares to return your strength, but only once you release what weighs you down. The inner weight does not leave through force. It leaves through recognition. It leaves through honesty. It leaves through facing the self you abandoned long ago. By the time you finally rise, the weight beneath your life will have begun to reshape itself. Parts of it will lift. Parts of it will dissolve. Parts of it will transform into clarity. And you will stand, not because you forced yourself, but because the soul has decided you are ready. The heaviness that once held you down becomes the ground on which you build a life closer to truth. and the weight that once crushed you becomes the force that pushes you toward a new direction. For nothing in the soul is wasted, not even the moments when you cannot rise. There comes a moment in every person's life when the soul begins to cry out from beneath the layers of daily living. This cry is quiet at first. It appears as a faint discomfort, a restlessness, a small ache beneath the ribcage. You dismiss it, believing it is nothing. But the soul does not stop calling simply because you ignore it. Its voice grows stronger each time it is silenced. This inner cry begins long before you ever feel unable to rise from your bed. It begins in the small moments when you told yourself that your feelings were unimportant, when you swallowed words you needed to speak, when you said yes to things that drained you, when you forced yourself to walk through days that felt hollow. Each act of self-abandonment becomes a thread in the rope that pulls you downward now. You may think the cry comes suddenly, but the soul rarely speaks without warning. It sends signs through mood, through dreams, through subtle changes in feeling. It tries to show you when you have wandered away from your true path. But the ego, eager to maintain control, pushes these signs aside. The ego says, "Continue, ignore this, you must keep going." And so the cry grows louder. Often the first sign of the inner cry appears in dreams. A person finds themselves unable to move, trapped in a narrow space, or sinking into darkness. These dreams are not random images. They are mirrors of your hidden state. They reveal the truth you refuse to face. When you dream of paralysis, you are seeing the part of yourself that can no longer move under the weight of ignored truth. A dream may show a locked door you cannot open. This door is the boundary toward the deeper self you have avoided. A dream may show a shadow following you. This shadow is the emotion you fear, the memory you buried, or the desire you suppressed. A dream may show you standing alone in an empty place. This emptiness is the part of your soul that has not been nourished. When you cannot get out of bed, you are living your dream in waking form. The dream has entered the body. The cry has grown so strong that it breaks through your defenses. You are not being punished. You are being summoned. The weight you feel is the weight of your own unspoken truth rising to the surface. The inner cry often comes from a wound left unattended. A wound does not disappear simply because you turn away from it. It waits. It gathers strength. It becomes a silent force in your life. You may have been hurt long ago by a loss, by a betrayal, by a moment of fear you could not digest. You may have told yourself that the wound no longer matters. You may long for freedom, for change, for a different path, but fear keeps you tied to the life you know. You suppress the desire, yet it does not die. It becomes a quiet ache that follows you through each day until the ache becomes heaviness, and the heaviness becomes stillness, and the stillness becomes collapse. Other times the cry comes from exhaustion, exhaustion of pretending to be someone the world demands, exhaustion of carrying roles that do not fit your inner shape. You mold yourself to please others. You hide your sadness, your anger, your longing. You become a figure carved from expectation. But the real self beneath this figure pounds against the shell, begging to be let out. You may have ignored this cry because you believed you had no time to listen. The world urges constant movement. It praises those who push through pain. But the soul does not evolve through force. It evolves through attention. When you deny the inner cry for too long, the soul withdraws its support. It forces you to stop. It forces you to listen. As you lie in bed, unable to rise, the cry becomes clearer. It speaks not through words, but through feeling. A pressure in your chest, a sinking in your stomach, a tightness in your throat. These are not symptoms of weakness. They are the voice of the unconscious making itself known. They say, "You must look at what you have avoided." The inner cry may show you the truth of your loneliness. You may have surrounded yourself with people, yet felt unseen. You may have spoken often, yet said nothing real. You may have lived beside others, yet felt deeply alone. The soul cries out when it has been isolated, even within companionship. The cry may reveal your fear. Fear not of failure, but of living your own life. Fear of making choices that reflect your inner world. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of losing the role you know. This fear has held you captive. The heaviness you feel now is the soul breaking the chains that fear has placed upon you. It may reveal your grief, grief you locked away because you believed you must stay strong, grief for things you lost but never mourned, grief for the person you once were but abandoned, grief for dreams you left behind. When grief is ignored, it becomes stone inside the heart. When stone grows too heavy, the body collapses. The cry may reveal your longing, longing for truth, longing for meaning, longing for a life that feels alive from within, longing for the freedom to be who you truly are. When it is ignored, it becomes a shadow that follows you everywhere until it pulls you into stillness. You may be afraid to listen to this cry. You may fear what it will show you, but the soul never reveals truth to destroy you. It reveals truth to free you. Nothing that rises from within you is meant to harm you. It is meant to bring your life into alignment with who you truly are. As the cry grows louder, the old self begins to crumble. This crumbling feels frightening. You may feel lost, confused, uncertain, but every transformation begins with the collapse of what no longer serves the soul. The heaviness that keeps you in bed is part of this collapse. You are not falling apart, you are falling inward, returning to the place where healing begins. Slowly, as you allow yourself to listen, the cry changes. It becomes less like a scream and more like a whisper, less like a demand and more like a guide, less like a weight and more like a direction. You begin to understand that the cry is not telling you to rise, it is telling you to feel, to see, to acknowledge, to confront, to release. When the cry is met with honesty, the soul softens, the heaviness loosens its hold. You begin to feel small sparks of clarity rising from the depths. A memory drifts upward, no longer frightening. A truth appears, no longer hidden. A desire surfaces, no longer denied. The cry becomes a language you can understand. This is the beginning of inner dialogue, the beginning of healing, the beginning of transformation. The cry you ignored becomes the voice that will guide you. It leads you not back into the life you once lived, but toward the life that waits for you beneath the surface of your old self. For the moment you listen, even with fear, even with trembling, even with uncertainty, the soul knows it has been heard, and what the soul acknowledges it no longer needs to weigh upon the body. When you rise again, you rise not out of force, but out of understanding, not out of duty, but out of truth, not as the person who ignored the cry, but as the one who finally answered it. There comes a moment in every descent when the heaviness you feel is no longer only the weight of what you ignored, but the weight of the struggle between two forces inside you. One force belongs to the ego, the part of you that insists you must rise, must continue, must act. The other belongs to the soul, the part that refuses movement until truth is honored. This inner battle is the true reason your body will not obey you. The ego believes it must control everything. It believes that willpower is enough to push through exhaustion. It believes that life can be lived by strength alone. And so, even as you lie in bed unable to rise, the ego whispers, "Get up, you must go on. You cannot stay here." But the soul answers quietly, "Not yet." The ego fears stillness because stillness reveals everything it tries to hide. When you stop moving, the ego loses its disguise. It loses the noise that protects it. It loses the busy tasks that keep it from facing itself. The ego depends on movement. The soul depends on truth. These two forces cannot rule you at the same time. When you cannot get out of bed, you are standing, though lying, down in the center of this conflict. You feel the ego pulling you upward, demanding action. You feel the soul pulling you downward, demanding reflection. This tension feels like paralysis. Yet it is not paralysis, it is choice. You are being asked to choose which voice you will follow. Most people choose the ego without thinking. They rise even when their soul cries out. They push through days that drain them. They silence the inner voice because they fear what it will say. They fear losing their familiar life. They fear losing control. But control is the very thing that leads them into collapse. The ego's grip becomes too tight, and the soul breaks it by withdrawing. When the soul withdraws, the ego feels powerless. It panics. It tells you that something is wrong with you. It tells you that you are failing. It tells you that you are weak. These thoughts do not come from the soul. They come from fear, the fear of losing the life the ego built, even if that life has become empty or painful. The soul, however, does not speak through fear. It speaks through heaviness, through quiet, through the strange feeling that you cannot rise because rising would betray something inside you. The soul says, "Stop, look, listen. There is something here you must face before you can continue." The ego does not understand this language. It believes every problem must be solved through action. But the soul solves through dissent, through silence, through allowing the truth to rise on its own, without force. When you feel too heavy to move, the soul is trying to win this inner battle. You may feel torn between these two voices. One tells you to get up, the other tells you to remain. This conflict creates a pressure in your chest, a tension in your mind. You feel trapped between two directions. Yet this trapped feeling is not a punishment. It is the moment when the old self begins to break and the new self begins to form. The ego fears breaking. It believes that if you loosen your grip, you will fall apart. But falling apart is not the danger. The danger is holding together a life that is not true. The ego wants to keep the old story alive. The soul wants to end it so a new story can begin. These two desires create the heaviness that pins you to your bed. The soul tells you that time spent in inner truth is the only time not wasted. The ego tells you that your value comes from what you accomplish. The soul tells you that your value comes from who you are. The ego demands movement. The soul demands meaning. When the ego begins to lose power, you may feel confusion. You may feel as though the things that once motivated you no longer matter. Tasks that once felt important now feel empty. Goals that once seemed bright now seem distant. This loss of meaning is not a failure. It is the ego's shell cracking. Inside this shell lies the deeper truth you must face. The truth that you have lived in ways that do not match your inner life. The truth that you have pushed yourself beyond your limits. The truth that you have carried burdens that were not yours. The truth that you have silenced your desire in order to survive. These truths rise when the ego weakens. The soul allows these truths to surface only when you are still enough to meet them. That is why heaviness appears. It is the body's way of keeping you from running back into the world before you have faced what lies within. The bed becomes a holding place, a chamber where the ego's power dissolves and the soul's voice becomes audible. This inner battle may create fear. You may fear losing your sense of self. You may fear losing your routine. You may fear losing the identity you built. But the identity the ego built was never the full truth of who you are. The soul is not trying to take anything real from you. It is trying to remove what is false. Imagine a seed buried in the earth. To grow, the seed must break. To rise, it must first be held in darkness. The ego fears this breaking. The soul welcomes it. When you feel unable to rise, you are in the soil of transformation. The breaking you fear is the birth of something new. As the battle continues, you may feel emotions rise unexpectedly. Sadness, anger, longing, or fear. These emotions belong to the soul. They were buried beneath layers of ego-driven control. Now, released from silence, they rise to be acknowledged. You may not want to feel them, but feeling them is the only way to free yourself from the weight you carry. Each emotion that rises is part of the truth you ignored. Each emotion that rises softens the grip of the ego. Each emotion that rises makes the soul stronger. You cannot win this battle by force. You can only win by surrendering to the truth within you. Slowly, you begin to see that the heaviness is not your enemy. It is the soul's attempt to save you from becoming someone you are not. It pulls you downward so that you may rebuild from below. It strips you of strength so that you may discover a new kind of strength, one that comes not from effort, but from honesty. The ego loses its power, not through defeat, but through understanding. When you see that it has pushed you too far, you stop obeying it blindly. When you see that its demands lead you away from yourself, you take back your inner authority. When you see that movement without meaning exhausts you, you begin to choose differently. The soul does not want you to remain in bed forever. It wants you to rise when you can rise from truth. It wants you to move when movement expresses your inner nature. It wants you to live in a way that does not crush your spirit. When the battle between the ego and the soul quiets, you feel something shift. The heaviness no longer feels like a wall, it feels like a cocoon. The stillness no longer feels like paralysis, it feels like preparation. The truth no longer feels like a threat, it feels like a guide. This is the moment when the soul begins to return its strength. A small spark appears, a faint desire to breathe more deeply, a softening around your heart, a sense of safety within yourself. The ego does not disappear. It learns its rightful place. It becomes a servant, not a master. It becomes a tool, not a tyrant. It becomes a helper, not an enemy. And when these forces find their balance, the heaviness lifts not through force, but through inner harmony. You rise from bed not because you must, but because you can. Because something inside you has settled. Because the battle is no longer tearing you apart. For when the soul wins, it does not defeat the ego. It transforms it. And you rise not as the person who collapsed under the weight of false demands, but as someone who has discovered the deeper foundation beneath all movement, the truth of your own inner life. There comes a point in your heaviness when the pull downward is no longer a struggle but an invitation. The battle between the ego and the soul quiets, and you begin to sense a strange peace beneath the weight. You are still unable to rise, yet the stillness feels different. It feels purposeful, as though something beneath the surface is preparing to reveal itself. This marks the moment of descent, the moment when you enter the hidden chamber of your own soul. Many people fear this descent, for it feels like sinking into darkness. But the darkness of the soul is not empty. It is filled with things you have forgotten, feelings you have silenced, truths you have buried for years. When you cannot get out of bed, the soul brings you closer to this chamber. It wants you to see what has lived in you without your awareness. In this inner chamber, time slows. The world outside fades. The noise of daily life becomes distant. You lie in a quiet space where only your inner reality remains. At first, this silence may frighten you. You may feel as though you are falling into a place you cannot control. But the descent is not meant to harm you. It is meant to show you what you need to understand. The bed becomes more than a place of rest. It becomes the threshold between two realms. Above it lies the world of duties, expectations, and outward movement. Below it lies the world of symbols, dreams, and forgotten truths. When you cannot rise, you are being drawn downward into the deeper realm where the soul keeps its secrets. You may sense memories drifting upward, not loud memories but soft ones. A moment you dismissed long ago, a feeling that once touched you and then disappeared, a small sadness you never allowed yourself to feel. These memories rise because the soul knows they must be honored before you can move forward. This hidden chamber also holds emotions you left behind, a fear you once pushed away, a longing you were too afraid to speak, a grief you swallowed because you believed you must be strong. These emotions do not disappear when ignored. They sink deeper, and the soul brings you to them now so you can finally meet them with honesty. You may find yourself thinking of things you have forgotten, relationships that shaped you, moments that wounded you, dreams you let die. These thoughts appear not because you are weak, but because the soul is opening its storehouse. It reveals everything you must feel before you can return to the world with clarity. In dreams, this chamber often appears as a basement, a cave, or a hidden room beneath the house. The dream self wanders into these places with both fear and curiosity. These symbols reflect the descent into the unconscious. They show that a deeper part of you is calling for recognition. When the waking body becomes still, the dream imagery becomes reality. Sometimes this chamber appears in dreams as a well or a deep pool. The dream self leans over the edge and sees darkness below. This darkness is not danger, it is potential. It is the birthplace of new life. The soul draws you downward, so that what lies in the depths can rise into awareness. As you move deeper, you may feel emotions rising one after another. At first, they may seem overwhelming. You may feel sadness that seems to come from nowhere. You may feel anger you did not know you carried. You may feel a longing that aches in your chest. These feelings are the messengers of the deeper self. They come because they are ready to be released. You may wonder why the soul brings these things to you only when you are unable to rise. The answer is simple. Only in stillness can the deepest truths surface. When the ego is silent, when the body is still, when the outer world loses its grip, the inner world opens its doors. The soul waits for the moment when you cannot run from yourself. This descent is not a punishment, it is a return to the parts of you that have been left behind, a return to the emotions you numbed, a return to the desires you hid, a return to the self you abandoned. The hidden chamber also holds the child you once were, the one who knew your deepest needs before the world taught you to ignore them. You may feel an ache in your chest as you sense this forgotten self. The soul brings you to this child not to overwhelm you, but to remind you that your deepest truths were known long before your adult life began. You may see scenes from your past in your mind, scenes you did not realize still lived within you, a moment of fear, a moment of hope, a moment of loss. These scenes rise because they were not completed. They remain in the chamber, waiting to be understood. The soul brings them now because it is time to free yourself from their shadow. As you lie in stillness, you may hear the quiet voice of truth rising from within. It does not shout, it whispers. It says things you have known but have not dared to admit. It may say, "You are tired of this life," or "You have outgrown what you once thought you needed," or "You have been pretending for far too long." These whispers are not new. They have lived in you for years. The descent also reveals the longings you hid from yourself. Longings for rest, longings for peace, longings for change, longings for a life that feels true. These longings are not selfish, they are sacred. They are the compass of the soul. When you cannot get out of bed, it may be because your life has strayed too far from these longings. In this chamber, you may feel the urge to cry without knowing why. Tearfulness is a sign that the soul is releasing something heavy. It lets go of what has been held too tightly inside. Tears soften the inner ground. They make space for new understanding. They are not a sign of weakness, but of inner movement. You may also feel numb. Numbness is not emptiness. It is the layer that protects you when the soul reveals too much at once. Numbness means you are not ready to feel everything now. You must rest first. The soul knows your limits. It only reveals what you can face. The descent continues until a shift occurs inside you. The darkness no longer feels threatening. The silence no longer feels empty. The weight no longer feels like a burden. Instead, you begin to feel held by your own inner world, held by truth, held by the parts of you that have waited patiently for this meeting. Slowly, the chamber becomes a womb, a place where something new begins to form, a place where the old self dissolves so that the new one can take shape. The heaviness that once pinned you down becomes the ground on which transformation builds. You begin to sense that you are not falling deeper into despair, you are falling deeper into yourself. The soul does its most important work in places the ego fears, in stillness, in darkness, in silence, in the chamber where all forgotten truths wait. This descent is the turning point. It is the moment where healing begins, not with action, but with surrender, not with force, but with acceptance, not with movement, but with presence. You remain in this chamber until the soul decides you have seen enough for now, until the emotions have softened, until the truths have risen, until the inner weight has loosened. And when that moment comes, you begin to feel a faint shift, a quiet warmth, the first soft stirring of strength returning, not the strength of the ego, not the strength of pushing through life, but the strength that rises only after one has met the depths of one's own soul. That strength is the beginning of the ascent. But before you rise, you must complete this descent, for only those who descend fully can rise as someone new. There comes a moment after the long descent into the hidden chamber of your soul when the darkness begins to change. It does not vanish all at once. It softens. It grows warmer. It feels less like a void and more like a place where something is slowly forming. You sense a faint shift inside you, as though a small flame has been lit in a room that was once completely dark. This is the beginning of the first light returning. The light does not arrive with force, it arrives with gentleness. You may feel it as a small breath you did not expect, or as a single clear thought rising through the heaviness. You may feel it as a moment of ease in your chest, or as the soft desire to move even the smallest part of your body. These signs are quiet, but they are real. They signal that the soul is giving back its strength, for the soul returns strength only after it knows you have listened, only after you have met the truths hidden in the chamber, only after you have allowed yourself to feel what you avoided, only after you have faced what required courage. Now the soul begins to release you from the grip of heaviness, not completely, not suddenly, but one breath at a time. You may find that your thoughts feel clearer, the confusion that once surrounded you begins to thin. You may still feel tired, but beneath the tiredness there is a sense of direction, as though something inside you knows where you must go next. The bed that once felt like a barrier now feels like a place where you are gathering energy rather than losing it. The first light often appears as a feeling of honesty toward yourself. You suddenly know what is true for you. You know what can no longer continue. You know what you need, even if you fear admitting it aloud. This clarity feels fragile at first. But fragility does not mean weakness. It means new growth. Like the first sprout pushing through the soil, the new understanding rises slowly. It has waited beneath the surface for a long time, and now it emerges because you finally gave it space. The descent was necessary for this birth. Without the darkness, the sprout could not break open. You may notice that your breathing deepens. You may notice that your thoughts grow softer. You may notice that small tasks do not feel as impossible. These are signs that the soul is returning life to the body. Do not rush this return. The first light is delicate. It cannot be forced into brightness. After great storms, the air becomes still before the sky clears. After deep sorrow, the heart becomes quiet before it becomes strong. The soul follows the same rhythm. As the first light grows, you may begin to feel emotions that are different from the ones in the chamber. There is less fear, less grief, less heaviness. Instead, you feel tenderness toward yourself. You feel compassion for the person you were before the collapse. You begin to understand how much you endured, how little you allowed yourself to feel, how deeply you needed this pause. Such compassion is a new light. It heals what judgment once harmed. It opens what shame once closed. It softens what fear once hardened. You may notice that your dreams begin to change. Instead of locked rooms, you may see open doors. Instead of sinking, you may see yourself rising from water. Instead of darkness, you may see small flames or dawn-colored skies. Dreams are the inner world's reflection of your healing. They show the soul preparing you to rise again. You may feel a soft longing returning, not the painful longing that comes from emptiness, but the gentle longing that comes from life. You begin to imagine moving again. You begin to imagine taking small steps. You begin to imagine reaching toward things that once brought you joy. These imaginings are like breaths of fresh air entering a closed room, yet the soul still keeps you close to the bed for a little while longer. It wants to be sure that you rise not out of fear, not out of duty, not out of pressure, but out of truth. The body will not yet allow full movement because the new self is not fully formed. The seed has sprouted, but the roots must strengthen. You may wonder why the soul returns slowly, but the soul does not rush. Rushing belongs to the ego. Healing belongs to the depths. Depths do not move in haste. Slowly, you begin to feel a faint desire to sit up, not because you should, but because something inside you is ready. You may sit for a moment on the edge of your bed, feeling the weight in your limbs, yet sensing a quiet life beneath the weight. This is the first step toward rising. It may feel small, but it is the beginning of transformation. As the light grows, you begin to notice where the heaviness came from. You see the parts of your life that were built on false beliefs. You see the demands that crushed your spirit. You see the duties that drained your vitality. You see the roles that no longer belong to you. This seeing is another form of light. It reveals what kept you bound. It frees what was trapped. Some truths may shock you with their clarity. You may realize that you stayed too long in a life that did not nourish you. You may realize that you silenced yourself out of fear of disappointment. You may realize that you cared for others while abandoning your own soul. These realizations do not bring heaviness, they bring understanding, they bring release. As the light returns, you begin to see which parts of your life must change. You see what must be left behind. You see what must be protected. You see what must be reclaimed. This inner vision becomes a map for the life ahead. You may begin to feel gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for what the pain revealed, for the truth it forced you to see, for the strength it is now giving back to you. The first light also brings gentleness. You no longer push yourself violently. You no longer demand perfection. You no longer speak harshly to yourself. You move slowly, with care, as if handling something precious. And you are handling your own reborn self. As this new self grows stronger, you feel the soul settle within you. There is less trembling, less fear, less confusion. A calm takes its place. A calm that says, we are not who we were. We have begun again. You may stand for a moment, feeling your feet on the floor. This simple act carries meaning. It symbolizes your first step into the world as someone changed. Not fully renewed, but no longer broken. Not fully strong, but no longer collapsing. The world outside does not yet know what is happening in you, but the soul knows. It has begun to rebuild your inner ground. It has begun to return the strength it once removed. It has begun to show you that movement is possible again, but only movement that reflects truth. The first light is not the end of your healing. It is the confirmation that healing has begun. It tells you that the descent was not for nothing. It tells you that the truth you faced has opened a door. It tells you that you can rise not in the old way, but in a new way. You rise not to return to who you were, but to become who you are. This is the gift of the first light. It does not restore the old self. It awakens the new one. And the new one does not rise with haste. It rises with grace, with clarity, with alignment, with a deeper knowing of what life must now become. There comes a moment after the long darkness, after the stillness, after the descent into the hidden chamber, when your body begins to feel its strength again. It does not return in a rush. It returns slowly, like dawn unfolding across a frozen field. The heaviness loosens its grip, the breath deepens, a small warmth spreads through your chest, and you realize that you are not returning as the same person who collapsed. You rise not because you forced yourself, but because something inside you has changed. The soul, having spoken its truth, now releases its hold. It gives you back the strength that it once withdrew, but it does so only because you have listened. You have faced the truth that was buried. You have met your own depths. You have surrendered to the inner work, and now you rise with a clarity unknown before. When your feet touch the floor, the world feels different. It is the same world, yet it does not feel the same. Colors seem softer, sounds seem gentler. Your own breath feels like a deliberate act. You stand in the world with a quieter mind and a truer heart. This rising is not the return of the old self. It is the birth of the new one. You carry with you the things you learned in the darkness. You carry the memory of ignoring your inner cry. You carry the knowledge of what happens when you live too far from your truth. You carry the understanding that the soul will not permit a life that starves it. You begin to see your past differently. You do not judge yourself for collapsing. You realize that collapse was the only honest response to the life you were living. You understand that heaviness came not to break you, but to save you. It protected you from walking further in a direction that was killing your inner life. As you stand, you may feel a strange sense of calm power, a sense that you will no longer move blindly, a sense that you will no longer ignore yourself, a sense that you now carry a responsibility not to others, but to your own soul. You begin to feel where your life must change. You sense which tasks drain you. You sense which relationships weigh upon your spirit. You sense which roles no longer belong to you. These truths rise clearly now because the noise of the ego has quieted. The new self that rises is honest. It no longer pretends to be fine. It no longer stays silent to maintain peace. It no longer carries burdens that are not its own. It no longer sacrifices its truth for acceptance. You stand with a new inner authority. You understand that no outer voice may command your soul. The world may demand, but you will not obey without clarity. The world may expect, but you will not bend without meaning. The world may push, but you will not move if the movement betrays your spirit. You are learning to live from within, not from without. As you take your first steps, you walk differently. Your movements feel slower, but more deliberate. You are not rushing to return to your old life. You are allowing the inner shift to guide your steps. Each movement now comes from a place of truth. You may notice that some things that once held power over you now feel empty. Tasks that once felt urgent now seem meaningless. Worries that once consumed you now seem small. Expectations that once shaped your identity now feel foreign. This is because the old self no longer exists. Its fears, its compulsions, its borrowed desires, they were left behind in the chamber. The person rising now is not driven by fear. They are guided by truth, and truth does not move quickly. It moves steadily. As you rise into this new self, you may feel grief. Grief for the years you spent away from your own soul. Grief for the ways you abandoned yourself. Grief for the life you upheld at the cost of your inner world. This grief is gentle. It is the soul acknowledging what was lost so it can build something new. You may also feel gratitude for the collapse, for the heaviness, for the darkness. These things, which once frightened you, now appear as turning points. They allowed you to return to yourself. You begin to understand that the soul works in ways the mind cannot explain. It withdraws strength when the life you live is no longer yours. It pulls you downward so you can see what you ignored. It holds you still so that truth may rise. It returns strength only when you are ready to live differently. This understanding becomes the foundation of your new life. You realize that the soul is not your enemy, it is your guide. As you rise, you carry its lessons. You no longer move without listening. You no longer act without feeling. You no longer force yourself into shapes that do not fit your nature. You begin to feel a sense of inner direction. A quiet compass turns within you. It points towards something that feels alive. You may not yet know what it is, but you know what it is not. It is not the life that crushed you. It is not the path that drained you. It is not the silence that suffocated you. The new self does not return to the old patterns. It cannot. To return to them would be to betray everything the soul revealed. You begin to let go. You let go of roles that suffocated you. You let go of duties that were not yours to bear. You let go of expectations that shaped you into someone you were not. Letting go does not weaken you. It frees you. And as you free yourself, the soul expands. You feel a new space inside a space filled with light, warmth, and possibility. You may notice that the world feels more open. You see paths you did not notice before. You sense opportunities that once seemed distant. You feel a new courage rising, not the courage of force, but the courage of alignment. This courage says, I will not abandon myself again. I will rise only into what nourishes my soul. I will walk only where truth leads. You begin to speak differently. Your voice carries more honesty. Your words carry more weight. Your silence carries more meaning. You are no longer afraid to say what you need. You are no longer afraid to disappoint those who demand the old self. You are no longer afraid of change. The world may not understand this new version of you, but the soul understands it. And the soul is your truest companion. As the days pass, you feel stronger, not in the way of muscle or endurance, but in the way of presence. You feel grounded, steady, aware. You live from your center rather than from the outer world. This is what it means to rise as a different self. It means you no longer betray your inner voice. It means you no longer ignore the cry of your soul. It means you no longer rise into a life that harms you. It means you rise into a life that belongs to you. And so the journey ends where it began, in your bed. But this time, when you rise with understanding. You rise with purpose. You rise with truth. You rise because you have returned to yourself. You rise because the soul has given you back your strength. You rise because you are no longer lost. You rise because you are ready to live a life that does not break you. This is the transformation. The heaviness that once held you down has become the ground on which your new self stands. You rise as someone who has met the depths and learned how to live from them.